Okay, hold it. Service entrance is around the back.
I am not a service worker.
Make
I'm
your
a judge
statement.
here.
Don't lie to me. You don't look like a judge.
Look at the badge. I'm late for a hearing.
I don't care what you have.
Yes, I will come.
You're not entering through this door.
That door is for court officers. I'm one of them.
Ma'am, I already told you. Visitor entrance is around the other side, and not until after 1 p.m. And I need to see some valid ID. I am not a visitor. I'm here to work, and you do not have the right to bar me from the judicial entrance. This entrance is for judges, DAs. You don't fit the profile. ID, now. This is the audio-visual record from March 14th at 8:52 a.m. The incident, which lasted exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds, resulted in the summary termination of a security guard, the filing of 2 lawsuits, one civil, one criminal, and financial losses for the contracting company, totaling $3 million. What began as a veiled act of racial prejudice became an exemplary case of karmic justice, documented and irrefutable. The state criminal courthouse is a monolith of granite and tinted glass, a place where consequences are weighed and measured in years. At 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, its halls hum with a low preparatory energy. The air itself feels heavy, thick with the scent of industrial-grade floor polish, aging paper files, and the faint, ever-present aroma of brewed coffee from dozens of hidden break rooms. In the restricted judicial wing, this ambient noise is softer, more refined. Here, the floors are marble, and the silence is broken only by the quiet click of heels on stone, or the muted electronic chime of a security door granting access. The light is artificial and unforgiving, cast down from long fluorescent tubes that make the brass nameplates on the oaken doors gleam with cold importance. This is a sanctuary of process and protocol, a world away from the chaotic churn of the public lobbies. It is a place of routine, where the powerful and the procedural move with an earned and unquestioned sense of belonging. Into this controlled environment walked Judge Evelyn Hayes, a woman whose entire career was a testament to navigating such structures with precision and grace. At 49, she was the presiding judge of the 3rd Criminal Division, a position earned through 18 years of sharp legal maneuvering and an unassailable reputation for judicial temperament. Her mind, on this particular morning, was occupied by the intricacies of a multi-defendant racketeering case, specifically a complex point of evidence admissibility she had been mulling over since dawn. Her focus was absolute. The walk from the private judicial parking garage to her chambers was a well-worn path, a physical and mental transition into her role. She carried a leather briefcase containing not just legal documents, but the weight of the state's authority. Her sharply tailored suit was not a costume, but a uniform, a visual signifier of her office, as recognizable to her colleagues as the judicial robes she would soon don. The guardian of this particular portal was Brian Miller. At 43, Miller was a subcontracted employee of ProTech Security, a man whose authority was derived entirely from a polyester uniform and a laminated badge. Official records, later subpoenaed, would reveal a pattern. 3 formal complaints in 2 years, all from non-white visitors, all vaguely citing aggressive conduct and unprofessionalism. The company had filed them away, deeming them unsubstantiated, a cost of doing business. Miller stood at his post not as a protector, but as a gatekeeper of his own small fiefdom. His posture was a study in bored belligerence, his gaze sweeping over those who approached, making instant, silent calculations of their worthiness. The security footage from CCTV camera 04A, time-stamped at 8:50 a.m., shows 2 men passing Miller's station in the moments before Judge Hayes' arrival. The first, an assistant district attorney in his late 20s, gets a lazy wave. The second, an older, white-haired judge, receives a respectful nod. Miller never asks for their identification. The protocol, clear and unambiguous, required all individuals to present their official IDs. Miller's application of this rule, however, was selective. When Judge Hayes came into frame, walking with the same unhurried purpose as the judge who preceded her, Miller's entire demeanor shifted. He straightened his back, his jaw tightened, and he took a deliberate step forward, planting his feet directly in her path. It was an act of physical interception, an unmistakable challenge. His opening words were not a request, but an order, predicated on a false assumption. He directed her to the public entrance, his tone laced with the condescending authority of someone who believed they had caught an intruder. Judge Hayes, her thoughts momentarily pulled from legal precedent to this unexpected obstacle, responded with the calm clarity that defined her. She stated her purpose simply, without emotion. But Miller did not hear her words. He saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see. He escalated, his voice rising in the quiet hall, demanding an ID he had not asked of anyone else. He gave his prejudice a voice, uttering the very words that would later be presented as key evidence. "You don't fit the profile.
The accusation hung in the sterile air, a flagrant violation of everything the building stood for. Faced with this immovable wall of bigotry, Judge Hayes did not argue further. She simply paused, her expression unreadable, and reached into her briefcase. Miller watched her, a smirk playing on his lips, confident he had won this small, ugly battle.
He was about to learn that he had not just challenged a woman, he had challenged the very institution that granted him his flimsy authority, a mistake that would cost him everything. The hand that emerged from the briefcase did not hold a driver's license or a simple state-issued identification card. It held a document that was functionally a key to the entire building, an emblem of ultimate authority within these walls. It was her judicial ID card, a heavy crimson laminate bearing the embossed gold seal of the state judiciary. The photograph was professional, her expression neutral, and beneath it, in stark sans serif font, were the words, "The Honorable Evelyn Hayes, Presiding Judge, 3rd Criminal Division." She held it not with a flourish, but with the simple, declarative finality of a presented fact. Her voice, when she spoke, was not raised, it was projected, each word carefully enunciated to be perfectly audible to Miller, to any potential witnesses, and most importantly, to the microphone embedded in the CCTV camera mounted above them. "My name is Evelyn Hayes," she stated, her gaze locked on his. "I am the presiding judge of the 3rd Criminal Division of this courthouse. You are, at this very moment, committing the offense of abuse of authority by preventing me from accessing my place of work, in addition to practicing a clear act of racial discrimination as defined by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Everything is being recorded." The effect was not immediate comprehension, but a system shock. The smirk on Brian Miller's face did not just fade, it collapsed. The security footage, later analyzed frame by a forensic video expert, showed a cascade of micro-expressions, the initial flicker of confusion, a wave of disbelief, and then hardening into a mask of pure, indignant denial. His prejudice was a fortress, and this incontrovertible fact was a cannonball that had just breached its walls. But instead of surrendering, he sought to reinforce the crumbling structure of his bigotry. "That's a fake," he spat, the words a desperate lunge to reclaim control. "Where did you get that?" The accusation was absurd, a child's logic in a place of adult consequences. He took a half step forward, his hand reaching out, his intent clear. He was going to snatch the ID from her. The action transformed the incident. It was no longer a matter of protocol or prejudice. It was now a potential assault. Judge Hayes reacted with the preternatural calm of someone accustomed to courtroom outbursts. She did not flinch or recoil. She simply drew her hand back a few inches, a small, precise movement that kept the ID out of his reach. "Touching a judicial officer in the execution of their duties is a felony," she informed him, her tone as level and cold as the marble floor. "I strongly advise you to reconsider your next action." Miller froze, his hand hovering in the empty space between them. Her words, delivered with such dispassionate authority, had momentarily pierced his rage. But the fortress of his prejudice was built on foundations of deep-seated resentment, and it was not so easily abandoned. The cognitive dissonance was too great. It was easier for him to believe in a grand conspiracy than to accept the simple truth that he was profoundly, cataclysmically wrong. His mind scrambled for a new narrative, one where he was still the hero, the guardian of the gate. He saw her composure not as a sign of professionalism, but as a tell. It was suspicious. A real judge, in his distorted view, would be flustered, perhaps even hysterical, or would have pulled rank immediately with a show of outrage. This woman's calm was to him the calculated coolness of a con artist. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to get inside, cause trouble. You people are always pulling stunts like this." The accusation was vague, unhinged, and deeply revealing. He was no longer enforcing a rule. He was defending his worldview. The CCTV footage captured his physical state. His face was flushed, a vein pulsed in his temple, and his stance was that of a cornered animal. In contrast, Judge Hayes stood perfectly still, a portrait of serene control. She had presented the evidence. It had been rejected. She had issued a legal warning. It had been ignored. She now understood that she was not dealing with a rational actor who could be persuaded by facts, but with a raw emotional force that could only be subdued by a greater institutional power. Further conversation was futile. It would only serve to escalate his aggression. So, with a slow, deliberate motion that was utterly devoid of fear or haste, she returned the judicial ID to her briefcase and retrieved her personal cell phone. Miller watched the exchange, his mind misinterpreting the action completely. He saw it as a retreat, a sign that his intimidation was working. A sneer returned to his lips. "Who are you calling? Your lawyer? You're going to need one when I'm done with you." He had no idea that the call she was placing was not for a lawyer, nor for the city police. She was dialing a number from her internal contacts, a direct line that would bypass protocol and summon a power from within the courthouse itself, a power to which he was directly and contractually subordinate.
What would you have done in Judge Hayes' position? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to see how this confrontation ends.
The phone in Judge Hayes' hand was not a weapon, but Brian Miller reacted as if it were a direct assault on his entire worldview. His brief flicker of uncertainty was extinguished, consumed by a surge of self-righteous fury. The sneer returned, uglier and more pronounced than before, twisting his features into a caricature of authority. He interpreted her calm, deliberate action not as a call for resolution, but as the desperate bluff of a cornered imposter who had been caught. "Who are you calling? Your lawyer? You're gonna need one when I'm done with you," he spat, his voice now a full-throated shout that echoed in the marble corridor, a stark violation of the courthouse's hushed sanctity. Every syllable was being perfectly captured by the sensitive microphone of CCTV camera 04A, his face a contorted mask of aggression under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. He could feel the phantom weight of unseen eyes, the cold, impartial lens of the camera documenting his meltdown, but his rage had become a form of blindness, a filter through which reality could not penetrate. He was no longer just a security guard. In his mind, he was a crusader defending the natural order of things, a gatekeeper holding back a tide of chaos. He had to seize control, to escalate the situation beyond her influence and prove he was right. He unclipped the radio from his belt, then dismissed it. This required a higher authority, an external force that would validate his judgment and expose her lies. He pulled out his own phone, his movements jerky and aggressive. "I'm calling the police," he announced, his voice thick with a sense of impending victory. "I'm reporting a trespasser impersonating a judicial officer. That's a serious felony, you know." He was performing for the camera now, consciously creating a public record, a narrative where he was the vigilant hero. Judge Hayes remained perfectly still, her posture unchanged, her expression a placid mask of observation. She did not protest. She did not argue. She simply watched him, allowing him to meticulously construct his own gallows, one lie at a time. He stabbed at the screen of his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice came on the line, calm and professional, a stark contrast to his own agitated state. "Yes, this is Officer Miller at the state courthouse, judicial entrance," he began, his tone a mix of importance and false alarm. "I have a situation here. A female, non-compliant, refusing to properly identify herself, is attempting to gain unauthorized access to a restricted area. She's belligerent, and she's presenting what is clearly a fraudulent judicial ID." He embellished the story, painting her as a potential threat, his voice laced with manufactured urgency. He was creating an official, permanent record of his own delusion, every word a nail in his professional coffin. The dispatcher, following protocol, took his information and location. "A unit has been dispatched to your location," the voice on the phone confirmed. "ETA is approximately 4 minutes. He hung up the phone, a triumphant, predatory look on his face. He had won. He had called in the cavalry, and they would see exactly what he saw. The call was completed. The police were on their way. An official response he had summoned not to his rescue, but to his ruin. 4 minutes. In Brian Miller's mind, that was the countdown to his complete and total vindication. 4 minutes until the city police arrived, sirens wailing, to validate his instincts and drag this imposter out of the hallowed halls he was sworn to protect. He stood with his chest puffed out, a triumphant smirk cemented on his face, the very picture of a man who believed he had just won a war. The phone in his hand felt heavy, a totem of his decisive action. He had followed protocol, he told himself. He had neutralized a threat. The CCTV camera above was no longer an impartial observer. It was the audience for his moment of glory, a record of his vigilance that would surely earn him a commendation from Protect Security. He imagined the scene, the confused look on the woman's face as the officers put her in cuffs, his own calm, professional testimony detailing her belligerence and fraudulent credentials. He had done his job, and he had done it well. The silence in the marble corridor stretched, punctuated only by the low hum of the fluorescent lights. But the first sound to break it was not the distant wail of a siren. It was something closer, more immediate. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of hard-soled shoes on stone, approaching from the secure area behind the turnstiles. The sound was fast, purposeful, and carried an unmistakable air of authority that Miller himself could only poorly imitate. He turned, expecting perhaps another judge who would witness his triumph. Instead,
he saw two figures approaching at a pace just short of a run. The lead figure was David Chen, the courthouse chief of security, a man Miller had only ever seen in company-wide training videos. Chen's face, usually impassive, was a mask of grim concern. Beside him was a uniformed court officer, his hand resting near his sidearm, his eyes scanning the situation with trained intensity. Miller's smirk faltered. This was not part of his script. Chen's eyes swept past Miller as if he were a piece of furniture and locked directly on Judge Hayes. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute.
Chen's brisk walk slowed to a halt, his posture shifting from one of urgency to one of profound deference. "Judge Hayes," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence, a clear note of respect cutting through the tension. "Good morning. Is there a problem?" The words, simple and professional, were a nuclear detonation in Brian Miller's reality. The foundation of his entire confrontation, the unshakable belief that this woman did not belong, was vaporized. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen under the harsh lighting. The smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed gape of disbelief. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the calm, impeccably dressed woman before him with the title Chen had just used. Judge Hayes, presiding judge, the honorable. The woman he had accused of fraud, threatened, and was about to have arrested was in fact one of the most powerful figures in the entire building. The court officer's body cam was now clearly visible, its small red light a glowing, unblinking eye recording. Chen's brisk walk slowed to a halt, his posture shifting from one of urgency to one of profound deference. "Judge Hayes," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence, a clear note of respect cutting through the tension. "Good morning. Is there a problem?" The words, simple and professional, were a nuclear detonation in Brian Miller's reality. The foundation of his entire confrontation, the unshakable belief that this woman did not belong, was vaporized. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen under the harsh lighting. The smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed gape of disbelief. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the calm, impeccably dressed woman before him with the title Chen had just used. Judge Hayes, presiding judge, the honorable. The woman he had accused of fraud, threatened, and was about to have arrested was in fact one of the most powerful figures in the entire building. The court officer's body cam was now clearly visible, its small red light a glowing, unblinking eye recording his public disintegration. Judge Hayes, her composure as flawless as it had been from the start, gestured calmly toward Miller. "This employee of your contractor," she stated, her voice even and devoid of malice, "has physically barred me from entering my place of work, accused me of presenting fraudulent identification, and attempted to assault me by snatching my credentials from my hand. He has since called 911 to report me as a trespasser." Every word was a hammer blow, a factual, emotionless indictment. David Chen's gaze shifted to Miller, and all deference was gone, replaced by an icy, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. "Miller," the name was a shard of ice. "Hand me your radio and your credentials. Now. You are relieved of duty pending investigation." Miller stood frozen, his world collapsing in a silent, slow-motion cascade. The distant sound of sirens finally began to cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second, not as a symbol of his vindication, but as the arriving orchestra for his own ruin. His world was collapsing in real time, all captured on camera. Subscribe and hit the like button to see the full, devastating financial and legal consequences of his actions. The sirens grew from a distant cry to an insistent, piercing shriek that saturated the marble corridor, then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Two uniformed city police officers, Smith and Davis, entered the judicial wing with the brisk, heavy-footed tread of men responding to a high-stakes call. Their expressions were set, their training evident in the way their eyes scanned the environment, assessing threats, cataloging individuals. They had been dispatched to a report of a trespasser impersonating a judge, a potentially volatile and serious situation. They expected a confrontation, perhaps a mentally unstable individual or a sophisticated con artist. They found something else entirely. The body cam footage from Officer Smith, timestamp 9:03 a.m., captures the scene from his perspective, a slightly shaky, wide-angle view of the tableau. He sees Brian Miller, his chest still puffed out in a pathetic display of defiance, but with a new sheen of sweat on his brow and a nervous twitch at the corner of his eye.
he sees David Chen, the courthouse chief of security, his face a granite mask of controlled fury, standing beside a uniformed court officer whose posture is rigid with tension. And he sees Judge Evelyn Hayes, standing apart from the group, her posture relaxed, her expression one of patient observation, a woman utterly in command of the space she occupied. Officer Smith, a veteran with 12 years on the force, processed the scene in a fraction of a second. The presence of the courthouse security chief and a court officer flanking the supposed trespasser was a glaring red flag. His training screamed that the initial report was profoundly flawed. He slowed his approach, his partner mirroring his movements. His gaze moved from Chen to Judge Hayes, and a flicker of recognition ignited in his memory. He had testified in her courtroom 2 years prior, a complex robbery-homicide case. He remembered her sharp, incisive questions, her commanding presence on the bench, a presence that was identical to the unshakable calm she projected now. The professional mask of the responding officer dissolved, replaced by one of immediate, unequivocal deference. He stopped a respectful 10 feet away from her. "Judge Hayes?" he asked, the single question slicing through the tension. His voice, clear and amplified by the body cam's microphone, was the final public validation of her identity, the external seal of truth on a situation Miller had tried to warp with his bigotry. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" The ma'am was not a casual honorific, it was a formal acknowledgement of her station, a verbal salute. Brian Miller physically flinched as if struck. The police, his final gambit, his ultimate authority, had just deferred to his victim. The entire architecture of his self-righteous narrative, already crumbling, was instantly leveled, leaving him exposed and utterly defeated in the rebel of his own prejudice. The blood drained from his face, and the body cam captured his jaw working silently, no words emerging.
He was no longer a gatekeeper. He was just a man who had committed a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering error, all documented for the world to see. The transformation in Officer Smith's demeanor from tactical response to official deference was total. He turned his head slightly toward his partner, a minute gesture that communicated everything. Officer Davis, understanding instantly, adjusted his position, his attention now focused solely on Brian Miller, not as a source of information, but as the locus of the problem. David Chen stepped forward, formally addressing the officers to establish an official record for their body cams. "Officers, thank you for the response," he began, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "The situation is under control. This individual, Brian Miller, an employee of a third-party contractor, made a false 911 report. He was in the process of obstructing a judicial officer from entering her place of work." Miller, finally finding his voice, managed a desperate, pathetic squeak. He was no longer a gatekeeper. He was just a man who had committed a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering error, all documented for the world to see. The transformation in Officer Smith's demeanor from tactical response to official deference was total. He turned his head slightly toward his partner, a minute gesture that communicated everything. Officer Davis, understanding instantly, adjusted his position, his attention now focused solely on Brian Miller, not as a source of information, but as the locus of the problem. David Chen stepped forward, formally addressing the officers to establish an official record for their body cams. "Officers, thank you for the response," he began, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "The situation is under control. This individual, Brian Miller, an employee of a third-party contractor, made a false 911 report. He was in the process of obstructing a judicial officer from entering her place of work." Miller, finally finding his voice, managed a desperate, pathetic squeak. She wouldn't show ID. It was a dying ember of his failed argument, and Officer Smith extinguished it with a cold, dismissive glare. "Sir, you were informed of her identity by the courthouse chief of security himself. You made a report of a trespasser, and I am standing here speaking to Presiding Judge Evelyn Hayes. Do you understand the legal definition of filing a false police report?" The question was rhetorical, a verbal confirmation of Miller's culpability. The legal machinery was already beginning to turn, its gears grinding toward him. Judge Hayes then spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the administrative details. "Officer Smith," she said, addressing him directly, "I appreciate your professionalism. Mr. Chen is handling the internal security matter. However, I will be filing a formal complaint regarding the false emergency call and the racially motivated harassment I was subjected to. I will require your and your partner's badge numbers for my official statement." She was not asking for help. She was directing the next phase of the consequences, asserting her role not as a victim to be rescued, but as an officer of the court initiating a legal process. The officers provided their information without hesitation. Their function had changed from responding to a call to being witnesses in a future prosecution. Officer Smith then turned his full attention back to the now trembling Miller. "Sir, I need you to place your hands behind your back." It was not an arrest, not yet, but a measure to ensure compliance as they escorted him from the secure area. The public humiliation was now complete and physical. The hands he had used to bar a judge's path were now being placed behind his back by the very authority he had summoned. As the officers led him away, past the marble floors and the brass nameplates, Brian Miller was taking the first steps of a long, irreversible fall, a fall that would be meticulously documented and quantified in court filings, depositions, and a financial judgment that would strip him of everything he had. The slow, humiliating walk Brian Miller took from the judicial entrance to an awaiting police vehicle was not an end, but a beginning. It was the start of a meticulously documented and procedurally ruthless dismantling of a life, a process set in motion by 11 minutes of unchecked bigotry. Justice, in this case, was not an abstract concept. It was a series of official forms, legal filings, and financial transactions, each one a direct consequence of his actions, all underpinned by the irrefutable truth of high-definition video. The first consequence was delivered before he had even been processed for filing a false police report. While Miller sat in a sterile interrogation room, David Chen, the courthouse chief of security, was on a conference call with the regional vice president of Protect Security. The video file from CCTV camera 04A had already been uploaded to their secure server. There was no debate, no investigation needed. The evidence was absolute. Protect terminated Brian Miller's employment for cause effective immediately, citing gross misconduct, violation of the company's anti-discrimination policy, and actions leading to catastrophic client relationship failure. This classification meant he forfeited his final paycheck, any accrued vacation time, and became permanently ineligible for unemployment benefits in the state. His annual salary of $45,600 was gone. But the true professional devastation came a week later. The State Board of Private Security, acting on a formal complaint filed by the judiciary, permanently revoked Miller's security license. The official report cited moral turpitude and a demonstrated incapacity to perform duties without prejudice, making him legally unemployable in any security capacity for the rest of his life. The very career he had used as a platform for his prejudice was surgically removed from his future. The legal ramifications unfolded with the cold precision of a flowchart. The district attorney's office, recusing itself due to the involvement of a judge from their own courthouse, appointed a special prosecutor. Miller was charged with 3 criminal counts: filing a false police report, a Class A misdemeanor, obstruction of a governmental official, a felony, and a hate crime enhancement was added to the charge of harassment, elevating its severity due to the clear racial animus documented on the recording.
Faced with the video evidence, a conviction was a certainty. His court-appointed defender advised a plea deal, but the special prosecutor, aware of the high-profile nature of the case, refused. After a 2-day trial where the jury watched the CCTV footage and Officer Smith's body cam video a total of 7 times, Brian Miller was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, a term that offered no possibility of early parole. The legal fees from his failed defense consumed his meager savings, forcing him into bankruptcy. Meanwhile, the corporate entity that had enabled him, Protect Security, was facing its own existential crisis. The termination of the $2.5 million annual courthouse contract was just the opening salvo. News of the incident, supported by the leaked security footage, became a regional media firestorm. The judiciary's audit revealed Protect's pattern of dismissing similar complaints, which triggered a wave of contract reviews from other government and corporate clients. Within 6 months, the company, faced with the video evidence, a conviction was a certainty. His court-appointed defender advised a plea deal, but the special prosecutor, aware of the high-profile nature of the case, refused. After a 2-day trial where the jury watched the CCTV footage and Officer Smith's body cam video a total of 7 times, Brian Miller was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, a term that offered no possibility of early parole. The legal fees from his failed defense consumed his meager savings, forcing him into bankruptcy. Meanwhile, the corporate entity that had enabled him, Protect Security, was facing its own existential crisis. The termination of the $2.5 million annual courthouse contract was just the opening salvo. news of the incident, supported by the leaked security footage, became a regional media firestorm. The judiciary's audit revealed Protec's pattern of dismissing similar complaints, which triggered a wave of contract reviews from other government and corporate clients. Within 6 months, the company lost an additional $12 million in contracts and saw its stock value plummet by 30%. To stave off a protracted and reputation-destroying public lawsuit from Judge Hayes for civil rights violations under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983, the company offered a swift and substantial out-of-court settlement. The final figure agreed upon was exactly $500,000. This was not an admission of guilt in their eyes, but a calculated business expense to cauterize a wound that threatened the entire enterprise. As for Judge Evelyn Hayes, her life remained a testament to the quiet power of competence. The day after the incident, she was on the bench at 9 a.m. sharp, presiding over the complex racketeering case that had occupied her thoughts before the confrontation. Her composure never wavered. Her authority, far from being diminished, was subtly reinforced throughout the courthouse. She became a living symbol of the institution's intolerance for the very prejudice she adjudicated against daily. Upon receiving the $500,000 settlement, she did not keep a single cent. The entire amount was transferred via a cashier's check to the Legal Defense Fund, earmarked for a program providing pro bono legal services to victims of workplace discrimination. Her act transformed a settlement born of corporate negligence into a tool of justice for others. The final ledger is a stark accounting of karmic justice. For 11 minutes of arrogance, Brian Miller lost his career, his freedom, and his financial stability. Protect Security paid a price in the millions for its systemic failure to police its own. Was the lesson learned? For an institution, perhaps. The cost of prejudice was written in red ink on a balance sheet, a language corporations understand. But for the man at the center of it all, sitting in a prison cell, did he finally understand that the profile he judged was merely a reflection of his own bigotry? Justice, in this case, was not concerned with his repentance. It was concerned only with the receipt. Have you witnessed a similar case where documented evidence brought about swift justice? Share your story in the comments below and pass this on to show that in the digital age, accountability can be just a recording away.